What up, folks? Got a little book review for you all today from an author who I haven't reviewed yet, but I've enjoyed their work thus far. That's Neil Gaiman. We're going to be talking about Neverwhere, published in 2008. I listened to this book on Audible a year ago or so, and just recently I started listening to it as something in the background. I really haven't been able to focus on a new story lately very much. I've been trying to get into the lives of Lachlan more, but my brain's just not wanting to focus on anything new right now. And so I threw on Neverwhere and found myself really getting into it again and listening to the book the whole way through. I gotta say, it's a pretty cool book. The premise is really neat. We follow a man named Richard Mayhew, and he finds this girl bleeding in the street, picks her up, is going to call the police. She begs him not to, so he takes her back to his apartment, lays her up on his couch, and the next day he ends up going with her to a place known as London Below. And London Below is where our story primarily takes place. It is where the people who slip in the cracks wind up. And it's a really magical place. It's really, really strange, kind of gloomy and dreary, but also has just like a fantastic charm to it. It's kind of like a darker version of you went down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland, I guess. And the story really seems to be heavy with symbolism. Neil Gaiman, as an author, I got into him through American Gods, and he seems to enjoy his symbolism and just kind of macabre, strange writing. Starting off with characters, something I think is one of the most important aspects of a novel. What? What do you want? I just played. You always interrupting my videos, dude. What's the deal? Huh? Go. Shoo. Anyway, I think characters are extremely important to a book. You can read a book with interesting characters and a boring plot, but boring characters and an interesting plot is more of a struggle for me. Let's start out with our main character, Richard Mayhew. Richard's a strange dude. He seems like the type of guy who never really questioned what was going on. He just kind of went through the motions of life and wound up where he wound up, kind of did what he was supposed to do, you know. The type to go to school and do everything the teachers told him and follow his family's career plan and, you know, things of that nature. And he winds up in London Below and is completely unprepared for just the strange and often horrible situations he finds himself in. But somehow Richard, for the most part, manages to rise to the occasion. He has, of course, moments where he's inadequate, which I think is actually a good thing. If you throw, he's just kind of a quiet dude who works in an office in London, and he's thrown into this strange world, and he really shouldn't be particularly competent in a lot of the situations he's in, and he's not, which I think is actually pretty good. But he still manages to have his moments, you know. So Richard was an interesting character. My first read through, I actually found the characters a little bit dull. But on my second listen, I have enjoyed them more. I enjoyed the book more as a whole on my second listen as well. Let's talk about Dor, who is the girl who Richard finds at the beginning of the book bleeding in the street. We spend most of the series most of the book just following Richard, and we don't get a huge amount of insight into the other characters. There's not enough just page time, I think, for everyone to get a super big development, especially with as much as happens in the book. But Dor is an interesting character, and her personality shown more in subtle ways. And I remember not liking her and really thinking she was kind of crappy on my first read through. Just not a great person. And I don't know why I thought that now, because on my second read through, I really thought she did the right thing in pretty much every situation she could. And I saw that she cared about what was going on, and she cared for Richard, who was just an unfortunate guy who happened to save her life and get cast into this really dangerous situation. A character who I think is really fascinating, well, again, we get even less insight into him, is the Marquis. And I would be curious to see, like, if Neil Gaiman could commission an illustration of the Marquis, because it's not exactly clear what he is. He's clearly not purely human. I believe he appears human. You know, he looks human, but he's not wholly human. He's a little different. I think the Marquis is pretty fascinating and has an interesting sort of gray morality to him. He's a good dude, but he might not go out of his way to save you, or he may very reluctantly do so. The two main villains in the story are Mr. Croup and Mr. Vandemar. And they're an odd pairing. They're often described as the wolf and the fox, and the fox is the brains of the operation, and the wolf is the muscle. And they have an interesting relationship. I always think their dialogue is funny when on screen, because Mr. Vandemar is always really slow, not very intelligent, and Mr. Croup speaks like a highly educated person would. And just their interactions between each other are funny. And the heartlessness with which they carry out their job as murderers and assassins is disturbing, as I believe it's intended to be. I'm curious what the inspiration for them is. Like, if I could sit down with Neil Gaiman, I would like to ask him about that. There is one more significant character, but I'm not going to get into them because getting into them would be spoilers. But I thought they were an interesting take on the character, and I thought it was different from what you'd normally see. As for characters, probably give the story probably a 6 out of 10 on characters. I liked them. I think they were better than average, but they didn't blow me away or anything. I didn't particularly connect with any of them strongly. The overall plot and story of this book was one that I enjoy. I enjoy the taking us, someone who is stepping out of our world, out of the mundane world, and into something else. You see it all over the place. Harry Potter's the most popular example of this. I'm currently writing a story where basically a very similar situation happens, and I just really enjoy that aspect, or that I just really enjoy that kind of cliche of the magical world right next door. And to follow a very normal, pretty average, unremarkable guy who rises to the occasion in order to help people who he barely knows but considers friends is interesting, and his overall development is pretty good. And his overall development is really nice to watch. So I enjoyed the plot quite a bit, and because of that, I think I'm going to go ahead and give the story probably a 7. I think it's really neat, and I enjoy Gaiman's darker spin on the magical world, just out of sight. As far as pace goes, there's quite a bit that happens throughout the book. I don't think the book was any longer than it needed to be, and I don't think you could have gotten away with it being any shorter, really. That's a mark of good pacing, right? I never found myself bored. There was always something relevant to the story happening. I know within fantasy, there can be a tendency for authors to extend their stories beyond what they need to be in order to develop their concept and build up the world, and just to let you get to know the characters better. And sometimes that is really good. Like, some of my favorite scenes in books are just, characters sitting around, smoking a pipe and talking. Those are some of the best scenes in some of my favorite books, but it can really slow a story down, and the fantasy genre does this a lot. Gaiman doesn't really do that. Gaiman finds a nice way of keeping the plot moving forward while allowing you those moments. One of my favorite parts of the book is when Dor and Richard have had too much to drink and are being hooligans running around the city. And it's great to see the interaction between the characters, but it's also relevant to the plot. I think he did a really good job there, and I think that's something that should be appreciated about his writing. So for pace, I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. The pacing was really good. As far as Gaiman's style, it's interesting that he can just tell you something. He can say, Richard picked up the book, and it doesn't seem to get repetitive, at least not in my opinion. I know more amateur writers, if you've ever read, rough drafts or work of just more inexperienced writers, there can be a tendency for their descriptions of what's going on to be repetitive and dull and feel clunky. Gaiman doesn't seem to have that problem to me. I think he writes very well. Very symbolic, but also very matter-of-fact way of writing. I don't really know how to describe it. You'd have to check out some of his works yourself. So as far as the writing goes, I'll probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. Now, because this is fantasy, we'll hit on the world building a little bit. Just to say, I don't think the world needed built within this story. It's self-contained, and London Below seems a lot more symbolic than it does realistic. I don't believe the intention of London Below is to be realistic in any way. And I feel like more realistic fantasies, or fantasies that intend to have a realistic sense to the world, are the books that need some world building behind them, and you need to understand a little bit broader scope of what's going on. I don't think this book needs that at all. The book doesn't go out of its way to do that. You learn about what's going on in the book and what's relevant to the plot, and that's mostly it. I think that's fine. So I'm not even going to rate the world building, even though this is a fantasy book. It's a fantasy horror. It comes across a little bit gothic horror to me. Correct me if I'm wrong. Genres are weird, right? But just go ahead and cross the world building section out for this book. Overall, I think this book is a 7 out of 10. It's really good, really enjoyable, and it's not a lot of dedication because it is a standalone book. Definitely check this out if you like any of Gaiman's other works, or if you like a mix between fantasy, adventure, and sort of gothic horror style. Alright, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope y'all have a good day. Peace out.